Welcome everybody to the fourth meeting of the Strategic Plan Steering Committee. And we're going to have a lot of topics to cover. We're going to get it all done within the next 2 hours. Some people are going to have to come and go, but the majority of the people are going to be here. And we're going to quickly just review our meeting goals and just a couple of reminders. And then we're going to have a 10-minute presentation on the 757 maritime industry's perspective on deep sea cables and the ideal placement perhaps where they shouldn't be placed. And then we're going to meet our new consultants, Telegeography and Interglobics. And really that's going to be the core part of our meeting today, to hear from them. These are the two firms that we've selected to help us really provide real solid input into our plan. And then we're going to have a small group breakout session in the end. We're going to have hopefully 20 minutes or more to have groups of about 8 people apiece. They're going to be 4 groups, and we've got an agenda of different topics we want each group to talk about and to report on, and we'll include their input in the minutes of the meeting. And then we'll wrap up with some immediate next steps. So meeting goals and project management reminders. You know, we the goals today really to meet the consultants, provide input on key issues, and understand our immediate next steps. Just a few reminders. Our meeting and related work are being posted on our project website, so globalinternethub.org or .com. In that website, I'll show you in just a minute, but it's just a really important feature because it really does capture our work and our insights as we're going. And then I want to remind everybody of our primary purpose and our guiding tenets, and the fact that we are generating awareness of our effort as we're going. But if you haven't been to our website, please do visit it, and especially the meeting minutes tab on the navigation bar across the top. If you click on that, you can go to any meeting and you can see what we discussed, the presentation slides, and then the minutes of the meeting. So we really are keeping track and inventorying our insights and being buttoned up, because a lot of people are curious about our work. And we keep saying, go to this website and follow us and see exactly what we're doing. I want to remind everybody, again, our primary purpose when we talk about Global Internet Hub and getting on the list, you know, that is really not our primary purpose. That's going to be nice if we make it on some list. But our real intention here is to accelerate our intentionality, to get us moving faster and developing our I-64 Innovation Corridor's digital infrastructure, with the benefit of driving Richmond and Hampton Roads economies, creating more good jobs and enhancing the quality of life of all of our residents. So I just want to make sure, I keep telling this to everybody, it's like, yeah, what we're really trying to do is make things go faster and to really take advantage of where the world's headed, and to be a hot spot, not just to be one for the sake of being one, but for the sake of all the people that call this place home. And so with that, we had a great discussion in the past meeting when we were in person, and these are becoming our goals, which really were discussed as sort of ideas and planning tenets. And there are 3 of them, but I want us to perfect these and really let this be featured right as you read the final plan. But we really want to make equity a primary goal. And these quotes, I think, were right out of some of the steering committee's lips. You know, it's like, you know, what does the world need another global internet hub? You know, well, probably needs many, but really that's not what we're about. Our members express this idea to, boy, couldn't we be a special place where everybody has incredible access to the internet? And so that equity focus really starts to really position our plan in a very provocative way. And then secondly, we need to serve all the communities in our corridor. We're a collection of little villages and towns and counties, and you know, all the way up to the MSAs, the urban areas. And then when you think about it as a mega region. So we want to make sure everybody benefits here. And bottom line is the bottom line. We got to generate more jobs and a return on investment for here. We're not just building an infrastructure or accelerating the development of an infrastructure just so other places outside our mega region benefit. We really want to maximize the work that we inspire and support here. And I mentioned media coverage as we go. we've been putting on these virtual webinars the first Tuesday of every month. We got one coming up in November. We're really going to feature a deeper dive into the subsea cables. And you saw some articles in the past, and Greg Gilligan on our staff at RVA 757 Connects is working on a few other feature pieces that'll come out. So we're hoping that we really bring due attention to what we're doing here, really kind of leading up to our release of the plan in early January. So I'll just stop there for a second. Does anybody have any questions up until this point, just sort of what we're trying to accomplish and that sort of 30,000 foot perspective on our goals and those guiding tenets? All right. Well, we're going to move forward then. The first topic really is to get into the deep sea cables, the maritimes industry perspective. And I want to make this point before we get into this content. You know, any of you, if you have a point of view and you don't feel like we're discussing it and it's critically important, send us an email or at the end of this meeting in the breakout session, bring it up. We want these meetings that we're having, a total of 6 of them. We'll find a way to fit you in on your topic if it's something you feel the whole group needs to benefit from. And or we'll you know, if you write up a little paper, we'll send it out. We want to make sure everybody uses this planning process as a platform to educate everyone on things that they think are important that should be addressed in the plan or included in the plan. It doesn't mean that we approve everything that's shared, but we certainly approve the idea of everybody sharing. So with that, we have a topic here that Will Fadou is going to share with us. And this is something that the Virginia Maritime Association has brought up a couple of times with my friend David. I said, okay, fine, let's have some airtime here. So I'm going to turn it over to Will, and Will, just take it over, and I'll advance the slides when you say next slide.
Perfect. Well, thank you, John, and for everybody being on this call. I see a lot of friends, and that's always encouraging. So they've heard my spiel, unfortunately, a few times, but I promise this one will be a little bit different. I will say, first and foremost, David does send his regrets he couldn't make it due to a personal conflict. But we're very excited for this opportunity just to speak on behalf of this initiative. We support this initiative. We believe that it's important for our region and for our state. And so we just wanted to make sure that we provide just a little bit of perspective on kind of what else is going out in the ocean. Little quickly about us. So the Virginia Maritime Association, we are a 102-year-old trade association here in the Commonwealth of Virginia, nearly 500 member companies across the maritime supply chain spectrum. So when you think of ocean carriers, terminal operators, trucking, warehousing, rail, cargo owners, tugboats, et cetera, if you're tied to the maritime economy in any way, typically we have that representation within our membership. And we really do exist to protect, promote, and encourage commerce through Virginia's ports. And in that case, I would also include all this work that we're doing with the telecom cables. Next slide, please. So here's a little bit of stats about our port that I love to share, just to kind of paint a bigger picture here. I'll let you read those. The important item really to take away is on the commercial side, we have about 21 to 2,200 vessels that call this port every year. And that's not including all the work that is happening with offshore wind. It is not including all the work and vessel transits from the DoD side. And we're an incredibly busy port. Next slide, please. So the maritime economy here in the Commonwealth, which to us means Navy, it means shipbuilding, ship repair, it means commercial port, it means offshore wind. And I'd say we could even tie in some subsea telecom work here. This is what it means for our economy. Over 10% of our state GSP. So you think for every $10, at least one of those dollars is tied to the maritime economy. Next slide. And you heard me mention it just a second ago. We're incredibly busy. I like to show this slide just to show essentially you have the AIS heat maps for the vessels coming and going from our port. You see what will be the CVOW commercial project offshore. You see some magenta lines, which really represent DoD training activity and those areas for Department of Defense operational exercises. And it really gives you a sense of, wow, we're very fortunate that we have a lot of these major industries overlapping each other. And what that really means for us is the need to just continue to collaborate and get ahead of these issues. Next slide. But this is what most people think when they think what's going on off our coast, right? If you said what's happening out there in the ocean, this is typically what people think. But we know better than that. If you go to the next slide. So if you haven't been to the Mid-Atlantic Ocean Data Portal, it is a fantastic tool. Shows you all different kinds of things, but I'm going to walk through a series of progressions here to show exactly what we have going on. So what this shows, you see the 3 transatlantic telecom cables coming ashore. You see that the little blue square there is the 2 CVOW pilot offshore wind turbines, and then their export cable for bringing power ashore. And what you see with that pink and magenta is our Atlantic Ocean channels, both to the southern approach and the northern approach as well, and then our pilot boarding areas. So this is what we have today. Now, one of the first things you'll notice immediately is we have cables next to a major entrance to our port as far as that channel, literally next to each other, okay? And that creates a challenge for when we're starting to do new things out here in the ocean that have not been done before. The commercial maritime industry that has been calling on this port for some time, they're not 100% aware of all these things all the time. And actually back in May of 2020, while we were constructing the CVOW pilot project, while the export cable was laying on the ocean floor and had not been buried yet, a ocean carrier came by, was waiting its turn to enter the port, proceeded to drop anchor, and actually, wouldn't you know it, land right on the cable, causing millions of dollars of damage and delaying the project for several weeks. Now, there was a lot of lessons learned there about how we communicate with the broader maritime community, how we communicate with anyone involved in subsea cables, a charting of cables, so that we can get ahead of this issue. Next slide. So this is what is out there currently today. If you were to look at a NOAA navigation chart, you'd see some of the same magenta lines. If you see the little buoys, that shows kind of where the entrance to the channel is to the left. If you look close enough and you see some squiggle lines, those represent subsea cables. So we have some of those charted already, as well as the wind turbines. So the maritime industry is getting a better sense of what is out there. Next slide. So this is something that is coming here soon. So we've worked with the Coast Guard for several years on what is their port access route study, both for the entire Atlantic coast, but also for our port specifically. And over several years, we've gone through this iterations, and this is the latest iteration of a consolidated port access route study that the Coast Guard has out right now. To create safety fairways, you can liken those to marine highways for vessels to transit up and down the coast safely without any physical structures in the way. When you think of subsea or anything power stations, you think offshore wind turbines, you think oil rigs, etc. This is critical to us. Like I said, we're over 10% of our state GSP comes from the maritime economy, is to make sure that our vessels that are getting bigger and bigger and bigger have safe lanes to continue to call on our port. Next slide, please. We're also working on offshore wind. So if you look at the little blue box, that is the CVOW commercial project, which will start construction in the next few years. And the little orange triangle in the bottom is the Kitty Hawk project. And then those red boxes represent what BOEM wants to do with the Central Atlantic lease areas. Now, if we lay those over the work we're doing with fairways, you can see that we still have some level of deconfliction to do. We're doing pretty good right off our coast. But as you go a little further to the northeast, up around New Jersey, Maryland area, they have some issues they're still working through of where offshore wind lease areas will go and where fairways will go. But it's to continue to deconflict these, because in the next few years, this is what's going to be what is happening off our coast. Okay, next slide. Now let's add back those boarding areas and entrance to the sea lanes and our subsea cables. Now, one of the things you'll notice right away is we have some subsea cables that may go through another wind farm. You see some subsea cables that are going to be going directly through a southern fairway, as well as right across the mouth of our channel entrance. So what that creates for us is opportunities where there could be some risk. It's risk that could be mitigated, and it's risk for us to continue to work through as a collective. And that's one of the things we do pretty well here in the Commonwealth is getting ahead of issues from the get-go. I will say that, and maybe, and this is to no one's fault, I think it was maybe just our own ignorance in maybe what's going on in a particular subsector of the industry. It wasn't until about a year or two ago, we were having discussions with the Coast Guard, and in all the conversations that were going on with the fairways and offshore wind, no one had really thought of, hey, don't we have these subsea telecom cables? And when we laid those over the map, it was like, whoops, here we are. So we're working on improving comms with the telecom industry as well, and making sure that they have a seat at the table with everything we're doing with shared ocean use, because it is that critical to our maritime economy here. So what does that mean when you think about your strategic plan? Two of the things I'll offer just as ideas from David and I. One is just the need to continue to get ahead of these issues and collaborate. So if we know where the three are going to be, and we'll work with what we have. But as future developers come and potentially want to put more telecom cables down, being able to invite them to meet with us and other maritime stakeholders and make sure that we can kind of dialogue together on the front end to deconflict as much as we can. And the final item that we're talking with the Coast Guard and the Army Corps about is the idea of potential cable corridors, if you will, very similar to the oil and gas industry, where you have rights of way, where sometimes you can have multiple pipelines in a place. What could that possibly look like off our coast if we had cable corridors, so that the industry would know, but on both sides, where cables could be routed to be deconflicted. It helps with permitting, and then the greater maritime industry also knows where they are and how to avoid it, to prevent what could happen, what I call spaghetti on the ocean floor, where who knows what the next 5 to 10 years are going to look like with offshore wind export cables coming ashore and telecom cables. You could just have this proverbial spider web of subsea cables all over the place, which, as you can imagine, could make a navigation chart possibly look a little messy. And it also creates a much broader area of risk from cable strikes, etc. My last slide, if you will. Oh, yeah, I want to make sure, but this is where we're at today. So keep that in mind, of what I just showed you is what's coming in the next few years, but this is where we are today, and we need to get ahead of it. So my final slide. And I said it before, just visibility is key. Let's all be talking about this. Let's all make sure that we're collaborating and networking as ocean users, and then just getting ahead of it as we can, meeting with future developers and potentially exploring some sort of cable corridor offshore with our federal entities. With that, I'm done, and I appreciate the opportunity just to provide a little bit of insight on what's going on offshore, and pending any questions.
Yep.
Thank you for your time.
That's great. Well, we do have time for a couple of questions. I see, Paul, you got your proverbial hand up.
Yeah, that's my proverbial hand. Hey, yeah, well, I know we've run into UXO issues before with the anchorages, especially at the opening of the Chesapeake Bay. Are we, I know we're talking about the core for other issues and stuff, but are we making sure that we're ensuring that there's no UXO in those areas, or they're looking at that already? Because that's often a showstopper.
Right, thanks, Paul. That conversation has not come up yet, at least with the telecom, but that's a good note to make sure that we're thinking about all the things down there. Thank you for that, Paul.
Well, this is Nancy. A question for you. First of all, I think it's interesting about all the parties and the fact that there's the communication that you spoke about. At the end of the day, is there a sort of a lead organization or process that this is like their daily job? You know, they never stop looking at this, given all of the moving parts.
Sure. So great question. I'm a little biased, but what's great about Virginia is we have an entity like the VMA, and I do a lot of this work on behalf of the association and our membership. So I don't do this all the time, but I do spend a good chunk of time with it, coordinating with the different partners such as the Coast Guard, Army Corps, different stakeholders. This has been educational to us to realize that there's more parties we need to know, such as the subsea telecom industry, because I'll admit this seems to have snuck up on us. I know it's not necessarily a new thing. I was chatting with some folks at NOAA on, hey, when did this first get charted? When did we first know about it over the last, less than 10 years? So always room for improvement.
Good. All right, one more question, Vinay.
Sure, thank you, John. Hi, Will, great presentation. By the way, yeah, it did happen within the last 10 years, and Microsoft and Facebook kind of drove the first subsea cable, and they were our key clients of my previous company. I'm more than happy to give you that background offline. But Will, I wanted to ask you two things. One, in terms of additional subsea cables coming to potentially Camp Pendleton and or Sandbridge or other alternative locations, are you or someone in your team actively tracking that, keeping abreast with all the developments happening on the subsea sector specific to Virginia Beach? And secondly, for being in touch, and there's an organization called ICPC, which is International Cable Protection Committee. It's a global organization. I'm just wondering if you're familiar with that entity, if you've talked to anybody there. And if not, that would be a good place for you to plug yourself and your team in. Yeah.
Good.
Well, thank you very much for that. And I was not familiar with that entity, so I will check them out. Any introductions you could make would be great. To answer your question, as far as offshore wind cable landings are concerned, yes, we do track what's going on with Dominion commercial project right now, the Kitty Hawk project. So that's the Sandbridge and Pendleton as well. And anything that has to do with a 408 permit typically comes across my desk as we look at these different things. But any insights would be welcome. Because like I said, this is a newer aspect for us, and I'm personally happy to learn more.
Yeah, I'll be more than happy to introduce you to some key folks at ICPC who you and your team will benefit from.
Okay. All right, great. And in the breakout session, if you have any other questions for Will, we'll get them answered and included in our notes. So thanks for joining us, Will. It's really informative. So now we're going to move into our consultants, Telegeography and Interglobix, and really do an introduction and hear from both firms about their process and how they want to do it. I want to remind this committee that in one of our past meetings when we were in person in Williamsburg, we really talked about sort of three-pronged approach to our research, that we wanted to understand interconnection hubs on a global scale, and kind of what are the facts that define them, to really get us on a common shared language to understand what we're trying to do and how to measure our progress. And it's multidimensional, but we felt like that would be a good step, a first step. And at the same time, to talk to, 10 global internet hubs is what we called them. I've come to learn that maybe a more accurate term is interconnection hubs, but we need to understand the intentionality that has taken place in these locations. And we heard from Marseille that it wasn't by accident that they became a major international force. They had a strategic plan. They had 10 characteristics that they really followed. And we met two of the players and had a great discussion with them via Zoom. And so we feel like there might be some lessons learned from talking to individuals behind the scenes at some of these international spots. And so we said, let's do both of these and save a little bit of our powder, a little bit of our resources, because we're going to learn something a great deal from both of these research efforts. And then that will be the sort of the second phase that we might want to go deeper on one particular area or another. And so in that third box, it's just a list of potential areas, but we know that the Virginia Economic Development Partnership is doing some work now. ODU is doing some work. So we want to make sure that we take advantage of all the other related studies that are going on, but we'll keep a little bit of our resources for that second phase if we want to really complement our knowledge in any one area to finalize the plan. So we went ahead and we put an RFP together. You guys reviewed it. It's posted on our website in the September 29th meeting folder. We really outlined what I just said. We had in that proposal all the questions that came out of our meeting, that secondary research, situation analysis. We had those 10 characteristics and about 10 questions per characteristic. So we crammed all that into our RFP document, put a short list together of the folks we thought could really help us and sent it out and asked for submissions. And the way we looked at these proposals, the first one is more quantitative in terms of really defining what these interconnection hubs are about. And the second one is a little more qualitative in terms of the intentionality behind these various locations. And so the RFP review team selected Telegeography and Interglobix as the two firms to do this work. And we're going to spend the next half an hour or so going in depth. And this is a chance for you guys to meet the two folks that are going to do this work, John from Telegeography and Vinay from Interglobix. We're going to start with Telegeography. And I want you to know both firms are like at the top of the game. They're experts. They actually know one another. And they're going to be part of our meetings going forward. So it's not just give us a report in December. It's really join us for the next two meetings and be available for us to call you with questions. And so listen to their point of view and process and then ask questions. And so we're going to start with John. Welcome to the steering committee, John.
Thanks very much, John. Appreciate it. It's an honor to be a part of this group and to be able to contribute something to the great work that you're trying to do to increase investment in the region. It's good to see you again as well, Vinay. It's been a long time.
Very good to see you too.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's go ahead to the next slide. I want to start by just giving you all a sense of who we are and the kind of work that we do. And then we'll talk more specifically about what we will be doing for the work on the committee. So for those of you who are not familiar with us, we're a telecom market research firm. We're very focused on the global wholesale telecom market. And we've been around for the last 33 years or so. And we do a variety of research services that are updated on a periodic basis surrounding themes of capacity development and pricing trends. Those are the broad trends that we track. And our customer base tends to consist of quite a mix of network carriers themselves, data center operators, content providers, government agencies. Basically, think of anyone who's interested in large-scale network development. That tends to be our customer base. Let's go to the next slide. So here's a breakout of the types of research we do in broad categories. We have four really broad categories that we cover. The first one being wholesale network infrastructure, and that's the underlying networks. And that consists of everything from transport network, including subsea cables, international internet development, data center development, and so forth. And most of the work on this side of the house has to do with gathering profiles on network providers and capturing who's developing what globally, and then tracking network capacity development. We have an entire team devoted to commercial pricing, and that team focuses on a wide array of pricing research, and that again is like the network side is based on primary research, surveying individual operators, getting a sense of what the trends are in the industry. We've increasingly gotten into WAN service provisioning as well, enterprise WANs, wide area networks. And this is basically private networks to get dedicated to interconnecting global enterprises with their POPs. And so we have several research products revolving around that. And I think I'm going to break out a little bit of this in the next slide. So we'll go into a little bit more about it. But the last category real quick is the consumer side. We have one team that is dedicated to the retail side of telecom development, and basically has a massive database of by nation globally, looking at the telecom network ecosystems in each country, looking at the regulatory environment, looking at the fixed line, mobile and broadband environments as well. Let's go to the next slide, John. So just breaking out a little bit more about the research process. So with those first three categories, the wholesale, enterprise, and pricing teams, as I had mentioned, we primarily use our own primary research for all of this. This is proprietary research where we are gathering survey data from individual operators, capturing a sense of what they're developing where, what their capacity constraints are, where they're building out, and what sorts of pricing trends they see over time for their services. The deliverables for these services tend to be based on a model of database and analysis gleaned from the database material. So we have a series of about 25 products or services on our website where customers can log in and see this mix of database material, profiles on individual companies or individual countries, combined with broad analysis on trends. The consumer team is based in the UK in Exeter, and that team relies solely on secondary research, lots of public data that they're pulling in on a regular basis to give an exhaustive coverage of what's happening in individual countries on the retail side. And that team also puts out our comms update, which is a free resource. So if you are so inclined to look at some of the free resources we have, one of them is the comms update, which gives a daily update of what's happening in the world of telecoms, and that is managed out of the UK office. We also do consulting based off of the primary research that we gather. And some of you may know us from our maps. Data visualization is a big part of what we do as well. And we have an amazing team that puts together visuals that depict the underlying research that we're gathering regularly. Next slide. So those of us that are working on the project, myself and my research director, Alan Malden, I'll be your primary point of contact. I'll be involved in the steering committee meetings, and I will be doing the bulk of this work. Alan is being brought in to deal with a particular component. He will be addressing the subsea side of it, looking at the market on the East Coast, which we'll delve into in a bit. Next slide. So let's talk about what we'll be doing as part of the strategic plan. Go ahead to the next. There are three aspects. Two of them are combined in that first major bullet. But basically, we're going to be providing, as John said, a data-centric overview of how we evaluate interconnection hubs. And we'll use some examples of major markets to show you how we track development. And what is happening in some of the major markets globally. We'll then take that and provide an assessment of the I-64 corridor and its advantages, disadvantages, and opportunities that you could capitalize on, given the kinds of metrics that we track regularly. The other component will be this submarine cable landing assessment for the East Coast, and Alan will be providing that portion of the project. Evaluating the current market, looking at what's coming down the pike that we know of, and looking at opportunities that Virginia Beach and your region may have to capitalize on investment coming down the pike. So the metrics that we'll be specifically looking at are listed for you here. when I talked to John, I really appreciated the conversations we've had so far and kind of feeling out what you're looking to do and what we can provide and what we can't provide. And that's kind of what we're going to delve into here. We track a very specific set of data metrics that really kind of get to the heart of how we view interconnection market development. And we're gonna look at each of these factors here in depth for you, both comparing them, looking at development in some markets that are already very well developed, and then looking at potential opportunities for your region as well. So the first one is international internet bandwidth, and I'm actually going to touch on that even more in a subsequent slide. So I'll come back to that, but that's a really key aspect of what we're going to look at. We're going to look at the data center environment, the existing ecosystem, the diversity of operators present, what they're provisioning, what kind of capacity development we see, and where we can, we're going to look at pricing trends as well, because we do look at retail colocation pricing trends as part of our research. We'll take a look at local network ecosystems, and that will comprise everything from, you know, what kinds of global, regional, and local carrier ecosystems are being cultivated in these markets, and what does that look like? What sorts of first mover companies do we see, networks do we see coming into certain markets to peer, like gaming networks, CDNs, and so forth? Where we can, we'll try to give some insight into that. What sorts of, and then further down and very closely related to that, looking at the IX environments, internet exchanges, and cloud infrastructure. These are all aspects of the network ecosystem that are really critical to seeing activity and investment surrounding network infrastructure. The internet exchange component is, I think, a really useful one, because the internet exchanges tend to be incredibly transparent about what's happening. And so you can get a lot by looking at the number of members present in an exchange, the number of exchanges in a market, and the traffic levels that you're seeing in a market, and the types of members that you're seeing. So there's a lot that you can gauge in terms of market potential by looking at that. So we'll look at that closely. Cloud infrastructure is also a tremendous bellwether. Wherever you see cloud providers moving, those tend to be markets that are in high demand, where you're going to see opportunity for interconnection infrastructure to take off. And we find that there's kind of a chicken and egg sort of thing in the network industry. There's different entities will watch each other to see what sorts of, who's moving where and why. And sometimes there's sort of a, you know, who's going to move first sort of dynamic. But among the first movers, you know, the major cloud providers will often start by moving in with a small footprint, with a cloud on-ramp perhaps, or something else, to bring customers into their ecosystem somewhere else. And then when you full cloud regions develop, where you see massive investment in infrastructure locally, then you know that there's tremendous demand right there for further infrastructure investment. So we're going to take a close look at that. Pricing trends I've already noted. Geographic location, I think, is going to be a really interesting one. And this is one that I have not explored that deeply myself, but I think it's going to be especially pertinent to what you all are doing. The question I want to raise in looking at geographic location is how does this particular component make a distinctive or a tie-in to existing infrastructure elsewhere? So you're in an interesting position in relation to Ashburn, which is one of the biggest data center markets in the world. If you look at Marseille by comparison, in its proximity to other global hubs, it's a lot further off. I think the distance from Richmond to Ashburn is something like 130 miles. Virginia Beach to Ashburn is another 100. Marseille to Paris is double that distance. It's a very distinct location. You all are close, but not as close as an exurb a suburban market or an exurb of Northern Virginia. So it's going to be interesting to look at how geographic location comes into play when it comes to differentiation. So those are the components that we're gonna explore more deeply. Let's go ahead to the next. Just a list of some of the markets that we're going to highlight specifically. And I want to talk a little bit more about why we're choosing these as opposed to some, well, as opposed to including a few others that might have been on the list if we had taken a different measure. So let's go right into the next slide. I want to talk about what we're not talking about. So when we first looked at the notes that you had from your previous meetings, we were frankly a little bit queasy about some of the questions about rankings, because I'll tell you what we do and don't track when it comes to ranking global hubs. Let's go ahead to the next. So what do we talk about at Telegeography when it comes to global internet hubs? We do track this, but in a very limited capacity. So when you see a list that's ranking global internet hubs for Telegeography, that relates to one particular service that we offer, our Global Internet Geography Report. And that measure, the methodology for that, specifically and in a very limited sense, shows us cross-border router-to-router connectivity. That's all it is. It's a very technical, very specific measure of where internet traffic is moving and hubbing. It doesn't say anything about what else is being built up around that. So if we were to track specifically our global internet hubs and talk about that as kind of a primary measure, we'd have to include some other markets on the list that would seem kind of random. For example, within the top 10, we would have Vienna, which is really not one of the massive when it comes to interconnection and infrastructure development. If we were to look on a regional level, we would probably, and we're comparing metropolitan markets, if we were to look at Africa, we'd have Rabat, Morocco at the top of the list, which doesn't really translate well when we're talking about where the real infrastructure is being built up, which is Johannesburg. So there would be some oddities. And the reason for that is because on a very limited level, we're just tracking estimates and survey data as to where international internet traffic is directly connecting cross-border. So with that in mind, I'm shying away from trying to talk about specific rankings, because when we track interconnection hub development, we don't so much track a comparison of rank and comparison of hubs against each other, but rather we look at where we see opportunity taking off. What's already really well established within its own niche and its own sphere, and where do we see investment opportunity coming down the pike? So let's go to the next slide. So, whether we call it internet hubs, network hubs, interconnection hubs, any number of those terms is good. What I want to talk about, though, is just the fact that we're trying to capture something more full than just our particular rankings of where international internet connectivity hubs cross-border. It's a much bigger picture than that. We want to capture the full interconnection environment. Where is the infrastructure being invested in? And that's everything that we talked about previously: the cloud infrastructure, the IX infrastructure, the subsea cable connectivity, the data center investment, all of that. And that all goes to serve far more than just international internet. As you well know, especially given the position that you all have geographically, you're in a position to capture not just international connectivity passing through to Ashburn, but a lot of domestic connectivity, which we don't track that traffic, but it's there and it's massive. It's probably far, far, far bigger than the amount of international connectivity passing through. So that's a component that adds to the potential for your interconnection market development. You also have opportunities for any number of other aspects in network interconnection that could happen within data centers in the region. And that's enterprise private network, the military private network, all kinds of layer 2 connectivity coming in that's not captured by that layer 3 internet component. So there's a lot more going on, and there's a lot more potential here, which you all well know and we'll explore even more deeply.
Let me just add, John, I mean,
Yeah.
this is exactly what we were envisioning at the onset. It's not about getting one ranking. It's about
Yeah.
building out our digital infrastructure to help us in this mega region.
Yeah, that's tremendous. And we're more than happy to support that vision. That's tremendous.
Yeah, and John, that holistic approach, from the time I got involved in the project, and we've been talking about telegeography, and I think that's where we see you providing that big picture holistic approach, which will be very, very valuable for this team to kind of, in terms of looking ahead. So
Wonderful.
yeah.
That's great to hear. Great to hear. Good. So just lastly, in wrapping it up, just a few examples of things that we've done in relation to this. We've spent a lot of time exploring these kinds of issues, both in our primary research and increasingly in how we're integrating our research into other projects that we do. If you look at DKICS's website, there are a number of market studies on interconnection market development. Those are, I would say to a T, every one of those was probably written by me. So if you want to get a sense of how we've used our research to evaluate interconnection market growth opportunity, that's a great place to start.
And just to put it in perspective for everybody, DKICS is the same company that's doing the official ribbon cutting of the world's largest data center neutral, carrier neutral internet exchange in Richmond on November the 8th. And John, I'll be sure to send you the invite as well for that shortly.
Thank you. Tremendous. Yeah, so we've done studies like that. As far as the subsea cable part, which Alan is going to be handling, Alan has done a tremendous amount of work on feasibility studies, business case reviews for investors, as well as custom workshops. So a lot of depth in terms of what we have been able to offer related to these types of questions. So we're excited to be a part of this. Thanks very much.
So let's open it up for questions, John. And
Sure.
We've got a all-star cast on the line here. So everybody, Nancy, we'll start with you, then go to Scott.
Great, thank you. John, this is a really exciting presentation, and thank you for doing it. Very clear and very exciting. A question and a comment. It sounds to me like the work in the scope today is really around assessing the power of the connectivity and the ranking, not so much the spin-off growth and economic development activity that could happen because of it. Is that a fair way to think about it?
If I understand that right, I think that's exactly right. We're not going to, for our part, we can't really address the results of what comes from this investment. We're looking more at the characteristics, the data, looking at the data. What are the characteristics of an interconnection hub? Then what comes beyond that? And I realize that there are a lot of really tremendous questions you all are asking about what comes after that. What does this result in? Once you're an interconnection hub, what does that mean for the local economy and investment and so forth? Those are wonderful questions, but that's not what we'll be addressing.
And that's good. And I think maybe a comment for the group, maybe a little cart before the horse. We have a couple studies going on in the region that try to assess assets we have, but you're right. It will be interesting to get your information and then sort of build on both. there's one with VEDP, and then there's one that reInvent. But anyway, I won't go into all of that. I was just curious to make sure I understood the exact nature of this particular piece of work.
Sure.
And Nancy, we hope that the NAE will address this, that we can pick up some work that's been done in other regions in terms of the ROI.
John, I'm Scott Brown. Great stuff. I'm thrilled that you're going to participate with us and do this. Got a tough one. Was there a market that you saw that you thought was going to develop for a subsea or a hub or region that didn't mature and didn't grow, that had the potential for it? I'm just curious if there's anything around, because I know there's been a lot of them that when they pop up, they just take off like a rocket, but there's any of them that didn't?
Yeah, that's a great question. I would address that by saying that I think that there have been a lot of regional markets globally that haven't taken off in the past, but we're at a unique juncture right now where I think a lot of them are going to take off. There's been a lot of talk for years surrounding places. The first place that pops to mind is Indonesia. There's been a lot of talk surrounding Southeast Asia in general for years, but in particular Indonesia, simply because the amount of the number of people, the amount of demand within that market, let alone its geographic positioning. This is an extreme example compared to what you all are wrestling with, but in places where we see lack of local access, kind of a difficult local operating environment and difficult regulatory environment, things don't take off despite incredible indicators that would suggest great potential. That's changing now. We're seeing potential everywhere in places like that, and locations in the Middle East, Latin America, throughout Latin America. One thing I want to say about this that I think would be pertinent to you is that for a lot of these places that have traditionally had challenges, there have been workarounds, and whatever the challenges you may be having, you can take this to heart, that there investors are finding innovative ways to work around traditional challenges. And as regulators begin to reform their way of thinking, you're seeing investors come in and supply their own fiber backhaul, for example, into existing sites, so that you don't just create a data center site that's in isolation in a market that's hampered for whatever reason, be it the local operator or be it some geographical challenge or whatever. They're provisioning their own backhaul. They're finding new ways to partner with existing entities within those locations to provision key aspects of their service that they wouldn't be able to do otherwise. We're seeing a lot of companies go in and partner with local power providers, not like power generation companies, not just the transmission companies, power generation, or local companies that are building out dark fiber, or they find that you have groups that have common investment across different industries, finding ways to work around existing obstacles. We're seeing in the Middle East companies start to work together that otherwise might not work together across borders to streamline services across a location, working with a utility company that has lines across borders so that they can provision seamless network connectivity to data centers that might not otherwise be working together. So we're seeing opportunities like this popping up all over the place. And but traditionally, there have been a lot of markets like that. I'd say in the US, there are all these, and this is where I think you would have, a market like Virginia Beach may have traditionally had a challenge too, at least when it comes to this particular aspect of becoming a focal point for global interconnection. There are lots of markets that are positioned between existing key markets. You think of like Philadelphia or Atlanta or locations like that are kind of between Miami Ashburn, New York, but and other secondary markets throughout the US, but there's opportunity, I think, increasingly in all of these locations. And we've seen some of them take off tremendously in more recent years, as network infrastructure increasingly has to move closer to the edge where the eyeballs are, and is being far more distributed than ever before. So long answer to that, it's the situation is changing, and we've seen a lot of markets that hadn't taken off previously really starting to take off now.
As a marketing guy, I'm delighted to keep hearing that word positioning. It's like, what's our position? You know, where are we going to maximize our opportunity and value? So Vinay, you have your hand up.
Yeah, just to kind of piggyback, John, on what Scott was saying in terms of markets, maybe I think it'll be good for the audience on this call to hear from you about a couple of the new emerging markets. Like you look at Barcelona in Spain, John. You look at Crete, you know, with what Interaction, not Digital Realty, is doing, both from a data center, from a subsea perspective. Some of the industry, I wouldn't call it trend necessarily, but you know, where the drift is, you know, where the industry is headed for these specific areas. And one quick comment, when you were talking about, John, Virginia Beach, you're absolutely right. I mean, it's pretty obvious that from a subsea cable landing perspective, we've got to look at how we can diversify the landings, how we can diversify the beach manholes and the front haul and the back haul when it comes to the landing itself. But this effort that we and John and team and everybody has underway is we were very deliberate that when we call it a mega region, you know, it's like from Virginia Beach to Richmond, the entire stretch, right, where we've got abundant dark fiber, we've got the NAP in Richmond, we've got the Internet Exchange, DKIX now coming to Richmond. So I just wanted to make sure that, you know, we had that mega region perspective when we were talking about this initiative we have underway, which spans really from Virginia Beach all the way to Richmond.
And let me insert the Eastern Shore.
Yeah.
Really,
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. I understand that. And that is a very different way of looking at it than just isolating Virginia Beach or Richmond as individual metro areas. This is a massive corridor with a lot of interconnection all along the way.
That was really our baseline when we saw the opportunity. I'm like, it's not just cable landing station, it's not just the data center, it's not just the dark fiber or terrestrial fiber, what's happening. It's the combination thereof and how we position that together as part of the mega region.
yeah.
And that's where John and his team have helped us tremendously.
Well, that's the role of the steering committee. So this is
If you can share a quick minute on John, on Barcelona and Crete in particular. I'm very intrigued with the developments there.
I'd have to go back and look at some notes, quite honestly. We've
Sure,
been tracking so many different things
Yeah, there's so much going on
across
these
the board
days.
right
Yeah,
now.
Yeah.
let me interject, John.
Yeah.
That for both of you guys, and we're going to hear from Vinay next on his approach, but I don't think that our committee has a bias towards what the markets are that you guys should really use as case studies, that you guys are the pros and should select the list and tell us why, you know, but we really, you know, we're never going to be LA,
Right.
but what can we be? And what are the best examples, if it's Crete or Singapore or whatever? But I think I speak for everybody here.
John, that's really good to hear. And honestly, yeah, and I realize too that as we, you know, at the early stages of something like this, while we're feeling things out, you're searching to see a comparison in a certain light, and I'm trying to understand better what you all are doing, and I think that point is really helpful. It may not be that we need to just talk about what's happening in the you know, in Frankfurt and London and Paris or whatever.
Right.
It may be that we want to talk about markets that look a lot more, that have more similarities to this region, and go from that route.
Back to those three goals that we have. We want to maximize this opportunity for our mega region and the people who live here.
So, you know, I think, I'm 100% on board with that. So I'd actually like to change the list
Good.
and suggest some alternatives that we could look at more deeply. And by all means, you know, especially Vinay, given, you know, the knowledge that you have about what the region is trying to do and what's going on elsewhere, feel free to you know, pass along suggestions of specific markets that you'd like to look at. I mean, we may call and counter propose, but I would love to have inputs as well. And I have some, I know that we'll have some very strong ideas about other markets that we'd probably prefer to cover than just the biggest markets. Yeah.
Absolutely, John. I see this as a collaborative effort, to say the least.
Yeah.
And also, you know, in terms of the end goal, as you can very well tell, John, no one on this call on this project is coming at it with a rigid connotation. Hey, this is what we want to be on January 1st. You know, this is our grandeur plan. But wait a minute, guys, we want to take an account of what this infrastructure means. I mean, it came to us relatively quickly, as we've all realized, and it's great. It's got some fantastic potential. Oh, by the way, there are a lot of moving parts here. Oh, and there's more happening even now and between the end of the year, for that matter, for all practical purposes. And what collectively can we do in terms of elevating this in the community, elevating this from an economic growth perspective? Of course, there is no magic wand here anyone has, with all due respect, to, you know, kind of make our region as, hey, John, starting January 1st, can you just have our region being called as a global internet hub? That's not our intent. Our intent is really kind of to get into this qualitative, quantitative analysis and use this as an iterative process in terms of, you know, okay, here's where we're at, guys, you know, beginning of the year. Here is what we need to do next, and how we do it, whether it's economic benefits, whether it's, you know, promoting more data centers. So again, it's a combination thereof, again, looking at it holistically, and we are very, very collaborative, flexible in that approach, you know, working with you, and we appreciate, you know, your support as well.
Wonderful. And with that in mind, I would like to, I think in addition to, you know, perhaps highlighting some developments in really specific markets, bring in, you know, what we can on of analysis on other locations too, for specific components, you know, not just focusing on, say, 10 markets, but making it more of a broad sweeping analysis of, you know, here's what we evaluate, here's what we've seen in this region, here's what we see in this region, here's something that may be applicable to you all, in addition to maybe a tighter focus on a couple of specific markets.
Okay, great. All right, John, well, please, I know your time was short today. We're going to have you at every meeting going forward, and you'll have, you know, you're going to kind of tranche your deliverables, if you will. You're going to be able to give us insights as we go, which is going to be great. And then also review our final report, which this committee will sign. So we're just thrilled to have you here. And anybody has any additional questions, use them in the breakout session, and then we'll get John to answer them and put them in the minutes. All right. So let's move on to Vinay. I think everybody knows Vinay. I keep looking at his picture when he was 15. I think it's really...
Just keep that picture, John. You make me happy. Every time I see it, I just bring the smile on my face. Just keep that picture for as long as you can.
Okay.
Please.
All right. So we don't really need any introduction here, Vinay, but two quick things. I think you see the relationship that Vinay has with telegeography, which is really part of the alchemy, I think, of what we have here. And the other thing is, you know, Vinay, thank you for being with us from the beginning. You got the guys from Marseille to come in, and you really have, we're part of the core team, and we kept you outside the selection process and sent the RFP to a number of other folks that could do it. And you got the job from our RFP committee. So why don't you just take us through your process?
Yeah, well, first of all, John, thank you for the opportunity. And, you know, from the first time that I spoke with you, John, I've been very transparent with you that to undertake such an effort is not a small undertaking by any count, and to look at it in a very neutral, holistic manner is something that I've been involved in this region, well, in Virginia for the last 22 years. But if you look at Richmond subsea cables landing Virginia Beach for about 5+ years, and I've seen that potential when you aggregate what's happening in Virginia Beach, what's happening along the way, what's happening in the Eastern Shore, what's happening in Sandston. So bringing it all together is very applaudable to begin with, and hence, I've been personally involved and spent my time with you and the team from day one. I believe in it. I believe there is a larger, bigger potential here for us collectively for the Commonwealth. So I appreciate the opportunity and thank you once again. And I completely understand being out of the process in terms of evaluating firms, and that makes sense. So, but thank you for making a mention. In addition to collaborating with John and the telegeography team, in terms of what John and his team are undertaking, I am basically planning on taking the existing 10 global internet hubs, identifying at least 2 people from each of those locations. Coincidentally, many of those people I have either already planned meetings with between now and the end of the year, or I can schedule 3 big events that I'm scheduled to be on. One is in Dubai at the end of November, which is the 10-year anniversary of DKIX in that region. And that's going to basically have a lot of key industry players from the Middle East region. Subsequently, I'm going to be in Singapore as a speaker for Capacity Asia. And same thing, there'll be a lot of CEOs from the Southeast Asian market. And then ironically, in the next sooner than later, in the next couple of weeks, on November the 8th, I'm hosting, as part of the Internet Ecosystem Innovation Committee, I'm hosting an international summit in Richmond, where many of the CEOs from this region, when I say the region, right, if you look at Marseille, we look at LA, we look at Sweden, we look at Hong Kong, there is no one person who's like, I'm responsible for making this region what it has become, right? There are different organizations that have been part of the ecosystem. And coincidentally, many of these CEOs are going to be in Richmond on the 8th. So I'm going to set up some separate time with them, dedicated, focused on this particular effort. And I've already started identifying who those key people are. And John, I'll share the list of speakers with you as well, and with Alan. I think you'll find it very intriguing when you see some of the known names, such as Nigel from Aquaquams, Raymond from Sunny Vision, Russ Machulik from RTI Cables, and many more who are basically coming from different parts of the world. Subsequent to that, John and team, my plan is to conduct additional research as needed for this specific 10 global internet hubs, in terms of existing published reports, other articles that are out there which make sense to incorporate. And really, I also look at, John, in the RFP, the additional questions that the steering committee has come up with, and I'm going to try to address those as well as part of this effort, because many of those are quite interesting, intriguing questions that will have an impact on the overall analysis. So I'll include that. Already talked about the collaboration with telegeography, which officially, I guess I can say, has commenced today with seeing John again. And really, at the end of the day, is to kind of produce the report as a Word document, and of course as a PowerPoint presentation. And my goal is, John, as I shared with you, that in the upcoming steering committee meetings, at least the next 2, I'll provide regular updates on where we're at, and then hope to have the first draft, a near complete draft by the end of the year, and use the January 16th steering committee meeting as the final deliverable, and present the official PowerPoint during that meeting.
That's great. That's great. So you're going to be with us, continue to be with us, and now in an official capacity. And I think back to that list, I think we just want the smartest list of the case studies that make the sense that can help us. So we're maybe collaborating with John on that.
I was going to say I'll collaborate with John on that as well, and just make it very, very clear to John that, hey, John, this is my plan.
Right.
And of course, once I have the the results from talking to these guys, if there is any opportunities where we can cross-pollinate, by all means as well.
And then we'll have questions for Vinay, but while I'm thinking about it, I just want the committee to know that managing this process, we are keenly interested in developing an ROI model. And I haven't found one that works, but I've got some hypotheses on how to do it. And we need that because this is a planning grant from Go Virginia, both regions 4 and 5. And they're fully expecting recommendations from our report on what to invest in next without any guarantee of investment. But nonetheless, if we make a compelling case, we have to tie it back to jobs. And so we really are going to be asking these other leaders, do they know of any studies that have been done in the past, but also being creative on how to really model this particular topic. So that's what personally I'm going to be focused on with Vinay's help and John's help. So any questions for Vinay? It's pretty straightforward. Well, Vinay, take that as a compliment. I think it's
Taken, John. Thank you.
okay. All right. I don't want to miss anybody. Okay, well, maybe we're not going to need all the time today. I would like to go and spend some time in what we're calling a small group breakout session.
John, before you start the small
Yeah.
group breakout, I just
Yes.
wanted to, this is Pat Cody. I wanted to make one comment on what you just said about tying it back to jobs.
Yes.
And when you're dealing with the sample group that you think is similar and that we could learn from, judging from my Go Virginia work, I would be much more interested on how the progression of related jobs and direct jobs has gone as their hubs grew than
Yes.
I am on what their studies and projections are.
Yes.
I'm much more interested in how many jobs actually came out of it.
Yeah, but Pat, I agree. And, one of the things I'm thinking about, I've got a list of different hypotheses, but could we use like jobs EQ and look at occupations related to digital infrastructure and go back in time and plot those to the growth of the hub, things like that, to really kind of come up with a model. Nancy, you probably have a lot of ideas on this.
Yeah, two comments. One is, aside from my reInvent role, reInvent, of course, is the support organization for Go Virginia Region 5, and we're involved in this planning grant. And to the points that were made earlier, I think it really would be instrumental to, at least at a minimum, have some narrative about the other hubs in terms of what happened after, and job creation is part of it, but maybe company attraction, other economic development measures, and how long did it take?
Yeah.
Did it happen overnight? Was it a 5-year? I think some of the process insights would be good. So even narrative, I think, would be extremely helpful, because I think you're right. All the folks that have commented about Go Virginia, I think those are the kinds of metrics that they're looking. And it's a planning grant, so obviously we can do more with it. But I think anything we can say would be really, really helpful out of learning from these other hubs.
Yeah. Because what we hope to do is really have a list of and prioritized of future investments that we need to really drive our, ascendancy and making this part of our economy. And so we got to show what would happen with investment. We got to take that leap with evidence. So great. Okay. Small group breakout. So you guys have done many of these in the last 2 years in the Zoom world, but it's a chance for us to meet as a group of 5 to 8 people. We're going to need a note taker from each group. So we have assigned people into 4 groups, and we really have tried to do a cross section. So you're not going to just have a group of economic development people. We really tried to get some industry representatives with economic development, chambers, governments. So it really is a mix for each group. But the first job is somebody be the note taker. And then we've got questions on the next page. I want you to take a screenshot picture of it so it's on your phone, so someone can kind of keep the order moving. But about 4 or 5 minutes a piece for each question. And then the note taker, send your notes to Laura Robideau, and then we'll combine all the notes and put them in the minutes. We're not going to come back and report out, if you will. Then Laura will send us a time update, So if we get started now, I think if we just go for 25 minutes let's go for 25 minutes, and then Laura will give you a 5-minute warning, and then we'll come back together for the last 5, and we'll break 15 minutes early. So has everybody got that straight? Is that a couple of nods? Yep. Okay. All right. Well, here's the list of questions. And if you want to go off script, that's fine. But would be really helpful. Everybody take a picture of this on your phone. But overall, how are we doing so far? I mean, this is a group of 62 people. We can improve. We're halfway through. So let's give us kind of your assessment. And then any other initiatives we should coordinate. Nancy mentioned a couple. We want to make sure that we are any live initiatives, we should be talking to those folks and to make sure that there is a complementary effort going on. One of the ideas that we've come up with in thinking to the end game is our final report. And not everybody wants to read 50-page reports, right? But is there a way for us to capture it visually? Because a picture is worth 1,000 words. Could we create a digital infrastructure map? Telegeography is the map people. I mean, they've got, if you Google them put visuals on the Google search, you'll see all the maps they created. But could we create a really cool map that shows our mega region, from, the entire span along I-64, but the entire span, and really bring to life our digital infrastructure? Is there a way that we could do that could potentially be an insert in the final report, and maybe even delivered separately to other people to say, this is where we are today, and these are the areas that we feel like investments needed. So help us think through that, and just create a list for us in your notes of things that we should include on that map. And then you saw today from the maritime industry, we feature experts. You heard Stan did an awesome job last time on Dominion and energy. What other topics should we feature in the remaining several meetings? Certainly the next 2 in particular. We're going to have telegeography come back. We're going to have Vinay deliver kind of where they are and some interesting insights. But is there anybody else that we should feature topic-wise or expert-wise? And then lastly, the meeting locations. Meta and CarMax have both said, hey, we'd love to have everybody in person at our facilities. If you're like me, you realize that every time there is an in-person meeting, it compromises attendance in the post-COVID world. So do we want to do that and get inside of what Meta has to offer, or the CarMax facility, I think, comes with a hybrid possibility meeting. But just want to get y'all's quick feedback on that. So those are the topics. Spend about, anywhere from 4 to 5 minutes each. Look for an update from Laura, and start off with nominating a note taker, and help us out. This is your committee. So there you have it. And we'll see you back here in 25 minutes. How about that? Can y'all hear me now? Excellent. Well, I got to say what I said before, because it was so important. I just wanted to thank Laura Robideau and Greg Gilligan from my staff, the entire staff of RVA 757 Connects. But Greg and Laura really make these meetings possible, and all the advanced work and all the details. And so, thank you, Laura and Greg. So, okay. The immediate next steps, just 2 important events that are just coming up. And we said we were going to try to make a big deal about the committee's work as we were working. So on November 1st, as part of our series of webinars, which we do at the beginning of every month, this month, November 1st, or next month, on November 1st, the digital port is going to be featured for an hour. And you can see our 2 speakers there. These are really informative, and I think we've got the most people signed up in advance already, but this is very topical, and these are recorded. And so in the past, we've done a couple of these on topics related to the committee's work. So we'll send out a link to all the ones that we've done to date related to this once this one's over. But see if you can sign up. You just go email Greg Gilligan at RVA 757 Connects, and you'll get on the list and get a link to this upcoming webinar. And we'll go in detail on the deep dive on the deep sea cables. But as Vinay mentioned, we are just serendipitously, as we're getting into the second half of our journey as a committee, there's just going to be a huge meeting in Richmond all day long And you can see where to register there on the website, ieicco.com. This is the second annual Internet Ecosystem Innovation Committee. And, the amazing list that keeps growing of all the rock stars in the digital internet world, digital infrastructure world. And so this is a free event, and please, if you can, come, and we're going to be there, and going to plan to get way up the learning curve by talking to all these folks. So that takes us to our next meeting, which should be on your schedule for November 29th. And we're going to hear more from Vinay and John, and maybe have another topic, much like we heard from the maritime folks today. And we're going to start moving towards a draft of what's coming out of this for us to review. We believe that we're going to have this meeting on January 17th. It's always been presented as sort of an option, but I think that we really should just go ahead and now ink that in, because what we want to do is get to a plan in late December that's informed by the work from Vinay and John, and from these great discussions. And then that plan, everybody will give feedback on. We'll finalize it in early January, and really get to a final draft towards the end of January. So we're still on schedule with the Go Virginia grant, and we're moving really right along according to the plan that they approved and have helped fund. So on behalf of RVA 757 Connects and the entire steering committee, thank you guys for staying engaged and making this a real meaningful experience. Looking forward to a final product. Y'all take care.
One note, if I may, is I don't know if it's possible to move that January meeting a week before, a week after. That is right smack in the middle of the Pacific Telecom Council meeting in Hawaii, and many of us in the subsea business are going to be there.
Okay.
It's Sunday through Wednesday of that week.
It's
All right.
this meeting in
Horrible place to be in January here.
I was going to say that, Joe. That sounds like a vacation.
Well, thanks for bringing that. Why don't we just look for the next week afterwards?
Yeah.
And we'll send a date out for everybody.
Thank you, sir.
Okay. All right, guys. Thank you so much. Y'all have a great day.
Have a great
Thanks,
week.
John.
Take care.